Hey everyone, my name is Shanice and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be wrapping up all of the books that I read in April. The good news is that there were 9. The bad news is some of them were not so great, but I did have some good reads sprinkled in. And I say 9, but kind of really was 10 because that Clarice Lispector Complete Stories book I technically finished within the first week of April, but I reviewed that one in last month's wrap up. Let me just show you the stack. Here it is. These are the books I read in April. So beginning with my least favorite of the month, unfortunately, is a book called The Truants by Kate Weinberg. I essentially was in a dark academia mood because of the new Taylor Swift album, which ended up like not being dark academia at all. Regardless, I went and picked this up just because I was in the mood, and this flopped for me. This felt so truncated and almost like a summary or a Spark Notes version of a better book that exists somewhere, but not within the 2 covers of this novel. Essentially, we have the main character named Jess, who starts university at a particular university because of a famed professor who is known for her classes on Agatha Christie. Jess loves Agatha Christie, and so she is desperate to be in one of the professor's classes. She ends up being a student of that professor, and within the first few weeks she meets what are described as like weird and dangerous kids, but they're completely uninteresting. Like they're not that unique or anything. Like the one character in here that's supposed to be so interesting, he's from South Africa, he's a journalist, is so ordinary and try hard. I don't know. I didn't really believe any relationship in here, and again, it all moves too quickly. There was no build up. It was just fast forwarded. It wasn't for me. However, I will say the mood was there, so I was seeking dark academia. It certainly was here, so I was satisfied in that front. The writing itself on a sentence level is quite nice. For a book with a plot is so thin, the writing itself is kind of confident, though it shouldn't be, but whatever. I gave this 2 stars in the end. I did not fully connect with this novel. Then for a book that I gave 2.5 stars, is actually my short story collection pick for the month of April. That was Ling Ma's Bliss Montage. From the title, you can kind of gather that it might reference film theory in some way. Similar to The Truants and its flat characters, I felt like in Bliss Montage, it was hard to differentiate the voices of each of the stories. It was almost like it was really all told by one person. And other than this one story called Tomorrow, I don't feel like any of them were as unique as they thought they were. They weren't really that creative, to me at least, except, like I said, Tomorrow, which, though it started off well and very strange, it kept me interested. It did kind of fall flat by the end. However, I will say there is this one story, Peking Duck, which I had read already. That one is hands down a superb story. Not just good for this collection, but good, period. I highly recommend that one. It is kind of talking about the layers of authorial power. It is rich, it is nuanced. By the end, you kind of have to think about which sections belonged to which person, which storytelling technique belonged to which character. So I thoroughly enjoyed that one. The rest of the collection, not so much. And also there's a story called Office Hours, which is like a thinly veiled version of the University of Chicago, which is where I went to school, but it's also where Ling Ma teaches creative writing, I believe. And it was like, just make it U Chicago. Why? We know it's U Chicago, just do it. The cafe Holy Grounds in the story is like a combination of the Cobb Cafe in Cobb Hall and also Hallowed Grounds. I don't know, kind of eye roll inducing. Yeah, not totally for me, and I don't really know if Lingma is really for me either, because Severance was not that great in my opinion. It just kind of fell flat. As did this collection, unfortunately. Another book that I gave 2.5 stars to is The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is a reread for me. I guess the good news is that I upped it half a star, and because I reread the first book, the 5th season, in January, at least the story is fresher in my mind than when I initially read this, because it had been like over a year since I had read the first book that first time. But I didn't have too much trouble picking back up in the story, which is, you know, very dense. Jemisin doesn't hold your hand in giving you information about the world. You just kind of have to let go and go with it. But I didn't really struggle with that this time around. There are just a lot of characters. Each and every scene, we get introduced to a lot of people. Sometimes it was hard to keep track of all of them. I can't say really too much about this book, except that continues the timeline of the first novel. It picks up on the present timeline of the 5th season, so we do follow those characters. I don't want to like reveal anything, but it also looks back in time to the moment right before the tragic event that sort of begins book 1 from a different character's perspective, and we also follow that character, and that timeline just slowly evens out and meets the present. If you read it, you know what I mean. If you haven't read it, you probably think I sound crazy, and none of that makes any sense. I really love Jemisin's writing style. She's fluid, she's poetic. Like, this is surprisingly poetic and lyrical in many ways. There's also the inclusion of body horror in here. There's a scene in which someone is experiencing like a piece of stone moving through their body and somebody else has to extract it out. It is gruesome. It is gross. There's another scene with like boils and yeah, but really visceral, really well written. The two things for me that I just struggle with, one is that this book just feels like a filler. It feels like this should have just been a duology. And then the other thing is that I find it really hard to visualize anything that goes on in this book. I find it hard to visualize what a stone eater looks like. Some of the orogeny that is being described, I have no idea. I rarely encounter that where I just like can't see it at all. But it's just, maybe it's a me thing, I have no idea. But it brings the reading experience down a bit for me, because it's just kind of words on a page, and because it feels like a filler and essentially is a filler. It didn't move as much as the first one to me. So I gave it 2.5, but there's still a lot in here that is captivating. And I mean, I'm not going to give up now. There's one book left in the trilogy, so I will get to it soon. But 2.5 for The Obelisk Gate. Then I gave 3 stars to El Beso de la Mujer Araña by Manuel Puig. Kiss of the Spider Woman. This is an Argentinian novel, an example of queer literature, and while I can see why it was so revolutionary for its time, this was published in 1976, I believe. I think reading it today, it's less extraordinary in what it's trying to portray about, you know, queer theory, the queer community. A lot of it is obvious now. This book includes a lot of footnotes in it, which elucidate on theories of queerness, of homosexuality. Lots of Freud is thrown in the footnotes, explaining scholars who have dissented to what Freud posited, and they were interesting, not totally needed, which I guess is part of the humor of the book. Okay, what it's about, there are two prisoners who share a cell. One is called Valentin, the other one is called Molina. And they are never named, like their dialogue is not in quotes, there are no dialogue tags, everything is just a dash. As the book goes along, you do get a sense of the personality of each of the men. Molina is the character who is recounting a lot of movie summaries to fill the time and to entertain the both of them. Valentin is a little more melancholic and more political. The reason why he's in prison is because of his political activity. The government is wary of him and his involvement in, I guess, the political left. So, you know, their personalities are distinct enough that you do see the difference between who is talking at a certain point. I really appreciate what this is saying about storytelling, how necessary it is, but also how it might be used for the bad, you know, like propaganda and misinformation. But, you know, it spreads truth as well. It gives people hope. It also has this kind of start and stop feel of like If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, where we want the ending of the story being told, but there's constant interruption. So it plays with, you know, the pacing of a book. It makes you really analyze what makes a story. So I loved those elements. There's one movie summary that Molina provides about like zombies. That's amazing. That was amazing. It needs to be a movie for real, for real. Really unique take on slavery. Like if Jordan Peele ever wants to make that movie, please do. Please do, you know, let me be the producer. I have no producing experience, but I will get it for the position. I will. Yeah, super interesting, really creepy. That zombie movie summary, I mean. Not really the book, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I wasn't completely blown away by it, but I totally appreciate what it did. And it was funny, it was emotional, and it kind of has a bit of everything because there are so many different movies that are recounted in here that are of different genres. So yeah, it can be really entertaining. And yeah, there actually is a movie adaptation of the book, which I still haven't seen, but hopefully I will soon. If you've seen it, please let me know what you think of it. Another book that I gave 3 stars to is actually one I returned to the library, and that was Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This one is very talked about as of late. It's kind of a star of 2024 so far. Essentially what it's about is an Iranian American college student named Cyrus Shams, or Cyrus Shams. He is studying English in an Indiana college. A big tragedy for him is that his mother was traveling and her commercial plane was accidentally shot down by an American missile. Cyrus's father, he decides to move with Cyrus from Iran to the US, to Indiana. He makes a big sacrifice to basically start their lives anew, to get more opportunity, more freedom. Cyrus is a poet and he is kind of obsessed with the idea of martyrdom, and he wants to write a bunch of poetry based on martyrs in history. But you can already see that he is in his own way trying to make his mother's death mean more than an accident. You know, it's almost like a waste of a life for his mother's life to have ended because of an accidental missile strike. So he really struggles with the idea of leading a meaningless life. If there is any meaning in life, how do you insert meaning into your life? And this leads him to New York City, meeting an Iranian artist who is a performance artist, and she's kind of living her last days in a museum and having people come up to her and ask her questions, just speak with her. So Cyrus goes to New York to see this exhibit, and that is really all I can say. The language here, I have never read anything like it. It's like bubbling with energy and creativity. It's like Akbar is phenomenal. Every sentence was sharp and funny because of how original it is, and like you're never gonna find a plot like this one. Because of that, the way that it ended, like the reveal, it just felt so pedestrian to me. I was like, please, please no. Once I got to it, like he's gonna do something to flip the obvious, right? And he doesn't. So it was kind of a major disappointment in that. I also feel like because there are so many little chapters and shifting perspectives, it kind of messed with the flow of the book. There was just a lot of starting and stopping, essentially. So is it worth it to read? I say definitely. Not my favorite, but I think with a writer like Kaveh Akbar, I think give it a chance. And his writing, his language needs to be read. I really want to try out his poetry. Maybe that's more where I find something to grip onto and absolutely love. But I'm very happy that I did try this, and I can finally have an opinion on the book that everyone is talking about. Now, the next book I technically have not rated because I'm rereading it and trying to make sense of it. But it is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. It's a poem, of course. Not gonna lie, the first read through, I didn't see what made this so great. Still working to understanding all the references. I read Ulysses by James Joyce last year, and reading through The Wasteland, it was very Joycean, you know, all the references, how conversational the text was. It's a good thing. It's a complex and tedious thing, but I'm not dismissing this. I'm still rereading, guys. I've made some notes. There's some German in here that I've had to translate, some Latin that I've had to translate. You know, it's a lot of work. But for now, I would kind of place it in maybe the 3 stars just because I didn't hate it, but I didn't totally love it either. But in rereading it, I'm kind of seeing more of its importance. With a few more rereads, I will see what the big deal is about this poem. So yeah, just being honest, didn't rate this yet, but I did read The Wasteland. Then my big book challenge for the month of April was Timothy Snyder's Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin. This is obviously not a light book. With this, I think Timothy Snyder has written a seminal piece in historical nonfiction. He might have written like the definitive book on what happened in the area that he calls the Bloodlands, which is kind of in between Germany and what was the Soviet Union, kind of the area in between, which included Soviet Ukraine, Soviet Belarus, Poland, all of those areas, and what happened to their people between the reigns of Stalin and Hitler. This isn't a compare and contrast of Hitler and Stalin. He's not trying to deny that Hitler was as bad as we all know he was, but he is saying that he shouldn't be the only dictator and killer of those years that should be known. Stalin killed technically more of his own people, more people in general, but his focus really is on the victims and chronicling everything that happened to them prior to World War II, during World War II, and right after World War II. You know, going into this, I'm not going to say that I know too much about European history, except, you know, general knowledge, of course, but not in granular detail. And I wouldn't say that this calls on you as a reader to know too much about it, because Snyder is a fantastic writer and he's clear in his explanations, and he presents everything matter-of-factly, and there's no confusion in what he's laying down. Still, it can be a lot. There were some times where I just had to reread some paragraphs because it's just fact after fact after fact, numbers, town names, leader names, battle names. It's a lot, and you don't want to miss anything, because if you miss one thing and you think you're going to catch up, you're going to fall behind. So, you know, take your time with this. So as someone who didn't know too much about this history, it was blood curdling to read some of the things that happened, you know, during the enforced famine in Soviet Ukraine. What people had to do to survive. It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And I really do appreciate how this is really for the victims. Timothy Snyder, in the end, gives names to some of the people that he mentioned earlier on, just so we never forget. It's odd to say that I enjoyed this book, but I learned a lot. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, just because my brain is too small to totally initially comprehend just all of this history. Maybe this calls for a reread. I'm not sure, but 4 stars for me is still very high. I'm very happy that I did eventually get to this year. Really brutal, but necessary read. So the next book I gave 4 stars to. I hadn't heard of it until I joined this reading group, and this was the first book on the reading list. It's called Activities of Daily Living, and it's by Lisa Xiao Chen. I will say, for the first 75% of this book, I wasn't totally loving it, but once it's synthesized for me, it completely worked. Basically, this is about a young woman named Alice. She's Taiwanese American. She is working on a project. The project is about the Taiwanese artist Te-Ching Che, and while she's working on this project, she is also dealing with the fact that her father is unwell. She lives in New York. He is in a facility in California, and so she goes and she visits him sometimes, and she's seeing him deteriorate essentially, but she doesn't have the closest relationship to him. They're kind of distant from each other, and so we really follow her and her daily life, her trying to compile information for her project. Maybe there's doubts as to whether it actually is going to be for her project or not. So this is very slow, very meandering. If that already sounds like you're not gonna like it, then you probably won't. This isn't about plot. This is honestly about daily observation, daily growth, and how progress can really only be seen in the long run. It also takes a really deep philosophical look into projects, into art, into storytelling. It was just very soothing and intelligent by the end. And I think if you know what it's like to just kind of be lost in life, to start projects but never really complete them and not really know where you're going, feeling like you're not reaching your potential, not really knowing what your goal is to begin with. I think if you know those feelings, then I think you will enjoy this book. I think there's just a lot of really astute language in here too. It's a quiet one, so again, just if you're gonna pick this up, be aware that this is not like a fast-paced literary fiction. It's very much quiet, meditative, and inconclusive, but purposely so. I really enjoyed it. It's actually now one of my favorites of the year. So yeah, 4 stars to this lovely little book, Activities of Daily Living. And then lastly, a book that I gave 4 stars to, and I've already kind of spoken about it in my book to film video that I posted last week. It's called Elena Knows, and it's by Claudia Piñeiro. This is another Argentinian book. Didn't realize how much Argentinian literature I was reading as of late. This was translated by Frances Riddle from Spanish to English, and this is about a woman called Elena, and she has Parkinson's disease. Her daughter, this is not a spoiler, this is on the back cover, but her daughter has recently passed away. Elena is convinced that she was murdered. Nobody else is convinced of that, but Elena is. She starts revisiting her memories and talking to different townspeople to try to prove that her daughter was murdered. This is presented as a crime novel. It is not a crime novel. However, it's more emotionally revealing at the end. Elena learns more about herself than she does about her daughter, but she also learns new things about who her daughter was. In that discovery comes the realization that, you know, we all can never know what another person is thinking, is really feeling. What they tell you they feel might not actually be true. What, even if you think you're so close to them and you know them so much, like a mother would assume of their daughter, might not be the case. What you think makes sense might not match reality and what happened. It also looks at just the lies that we tell ourselves to prevent thinking of the worst. Also, it takes a really deep look at what living with a disability is like, in this case, Parkinson's. Just the daily tasks that, as an able-bodied person would never think of as difficult, like taking a step or going on a train. Just everything becomes an issue for Elena because the world doesn't make itself accessible to her and to her different way of walking in the world. I think the end with what it was trying to say about a certain topic that I'm not going to reveal. It was on the nose, though I agree with it politically 100%. It was just a little preachy for me. I don't mind that message is being spread. I spread it myself and believe it firmly, but it just didn't feel like fiction, and the rest of the book was so good that it just felt kind of like, I'll say the word pedestrian again. I said it for Martyr, and I guess I will maybe say that for that little on the nose end. However, still really thrilling and revelatory, and I really love this. What a surprise. I know I'm a few years late to reading this since it's come out. I know it was nominated for an international booker, I believe. Didn't win, but I haven't read the other nominees from that year, so I can't say whether it deserved to win or not. But yeah, highly enjoyed it. Another one of my favorites of the year. I guess it was a mixed bag for April, but I did find some gems, some new favorites, and I'm overall really pleased. Please comment down below what your favorite book was of the month of April, and also what's your least favorite book in the month of April. I'm currently up to a so-so start in May. The books I'm reading are not all that great, but you know, it's just like week 1 of the month, so I still have time to pick some 5-star reads. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all next week. Bye.